In 2022, Sri Lankans stormed the presidential palace. In 2024, Bangladeshi students brought down one of South Asia's longest-serving leaders. In 2025, Nepal Gen Z protests led to a kind of an anarchy when the government put a ban on social media, and we got to know how they elected the new leader. In India, in 2026, there is a new political party. Well, it started as a meme, and we don't know if it's going to form into a political party, but it's a political movement started by the Gen Z out of the frustrations of exam leak papers, the education board and the education minister not responding to their demands, having studied so much yet having no jobs. That led to a movement called the Cockroach Janta party. The same has been happening in Thailand, where young people challenged institutions that previous generations rarely did. In Indonesia, students marched against political dynasties, corruption, and what they looked at political backsliding. So are we experiencing an Asian Spring, where young people across Asia are revolting against structures, changes in the institutions? But before we get into detail about that, let's first talk about the Arab Spring.
What was the Arab Spring? In December 2010, protests in Tunisia began after a young man set himself on fire. Weeks later, President Ben Ali fled the country. In January 2011, Egypt rose up. Just 18 days later, Hosni Mubarak resigned. Then came Libya, February 2011. Rebellion turned to war, and Gaddafi was killed. In Yemen, the same month, Ali Abdullah Saleh gave up power, but the country fell into chaos. Bahrain, also February, protests crushed by force. Syria, March 2011. Peaceful protests led to one of the deadliest wars of our time. All across the map, the Arab Spring changed everything. But was it true freedom, or just a new kind of struggle?
Different countries, different systems, different religions, different political systems. But yet, there is one thing that brings all of these countries in Asia together. It's disappointment. Because what happens when a generation that has been told to study hard, work hard, and trust the system, but the repeated question that every youth from these countries in Asia is asking, that what happens when the system doesn't hold up to their side of the bargain? Asia is succeeding, so why is everyone angry? In fact, Asia is not collapsing. Asia has been one of the greatest success stories of modern history. China lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty. India is known as one of the world's fastest growing economies. Vietnam became a manufacturing powerhouse. Bangladesh dramatically improved life expectancy and literacy. Living standards have really improved across the continent, so why is everyone still angry? Political scientist Samuel Huntington had an interesting idea. He called it the revolution of rising expectations. People don't rebel when life is at its worst. People rebel when life improves and you expect more from it. The problem isn't simply poverty. The problem is this huge gap between expectations and reality. And that is the huge gap that is constantly being felt by the young people across the continent. For decades, Asian parents repeatedly said the same thing: study hard, work hard, get a degree, have a stable life, because all of these factors will let you achieve to a point where you can live a peaceful, stable life. Now, this formula perhaps worked for the previous generations, but it really doesn't work for this generation. It doesn't work for the Gen Z, it doesn't work for the millennial, and to certain levels, it's also not working for the millennials. So what happens? This generation is the most educated, is the most socially aware, has traveled more, has more experiences, so they can constantly reject this idea. They reject this idea because there is rising house prices, rising rent prices, there is unemployment, there are not enough vacancies for as many people who are applying for these jobs, there is burnout, there is intense competition, there is this very unstable political climate, and there is declining social mobility. In many countries, opportunities are in decline. The problem is that millions of young people are chasing too few good opportunities. Social media broke the illusion. Previous generations suspected corruption, but the Gen Z is watching all of this happen in real time, live on social media. Every exam paper that is leaked, every corruption scandal, every political dynasty move, all of the privileges that the Nepo babies of the political dynasties hold, and then they are being held accountable on TikTok, while all the extravagant, opulent display of wealth when the country's youth are struggling. Every luxury car that's been bought with the public money, every questionable governmental contract, everything is documented, everything is shared, everything is seen, because everything becomes evidence live online.
These protesters in New Delhi, India, brought diapers, not for babies, but for the government, over allegations that a crucial medical exam taken by millions of students had been leaked last month.
There is not even a single exam, government exam in India, which does not leak. Maybe use a diaper to prevent leakages.
For nearly a week, Abhijit Dipke, the founder of the satirical Cockroach Janta party, has been camped out in New Delhi over a national exam system mired in controversy. He's been leading a movement of frustrated Gen Zers who say they're fed up after years of leaked exam papers and soaring youth unemployment. It began as satire, but has morphed into a movement of young people demanding government accountability.
Like the recent CBSE exam scandal in India involved a massive controversy over the Class 12 board examinations, triggered by our newly implemented on-screen marking systems. What happened here? Well, 3 teenagers exposed critical systems. 3 teenagers recognized critical problems with the evaluation systems. They reported this to the authorities of the examination board of Class 12, and they did not react. They did not take any action against. Students were receiving mismatched answer sheets. There were security vulnerabilities that left the grading system, that was an online portal, open to tampering. There was also questionable tendering practices that was assigned to a specific tech firm. These 3 17-year-old students exposed everything on their X account, and yet the government did not take accountability until it led to this whole Gen Z movement called the Cockroach Janta Party. Why did that happen from the Cockroach Janta Party? Because one of the CGI Supreme Court judges recently criticized the Gen Z of the country, saying that they are unemployed and they have nothing to do, so they are just constantly filing RTIs and filing complaints and becoming these activists. Now, this led to a whole plethora of reaction where one youth created a meme. The meme converted into a movement because this CGI Supreme Court judge called the young people cockroaches. He said these cockroaches who are unemployed are going ahead and creating these RTIs, filing for complaints and being these young activists. They're all cockroaches who don't want to do any work. So why would they want to be cockroaches when there is no job opportunities available in India? So this anger led to a youth movement which turned into the Cockroach Janta Party, where all the youth across India are calling themselves cockroaches and are coming out in huge numbers calling for the resignation of the education minister.
Dipke says he will remain on the streets of New Delhi until India's education minister steps down.
We are here for the long haul, so no matter how many days it takes, but we are going to be here until Dharmendra Pradhan resigns.
A similar revolt happened in Nepal, where the younger generation who was struggling with housing, struggling with rent, struggling with not enough opportunities in the country, and they started this movement called the Nepo baby online.
Last 48 hours, Gen Z has shown us that they can do things that other generations took decades and decades. Contrary to what the international media is saying, these protests were happening to protest against corruption and not the social media ban, even though the social media ban is what sparked a lot of conversations around this. And there's a lot of conversation that started up around Nepo babies and exposing these families and their luxurious lives and all the wealth they have. It actually started, this was actually following suit from Indonesia and what was happening in Indonesia, which they were calling out their Nepo babies. And a peaceful protest was organized.
Or on TikTok, they were sharing their life struggles in comparison to the sons and daughters of the political leaders, and how lavish their lifestyle is from all the money that they are paying them, and how the young children, the young people, the youth of the country are still struggling, while the privileged of a few get to live this beautiful, luxurious life with expensive bags, expensive cars, and abroad trip. Now, a lazy reply would be that Asia is corrupt. Asian countries have always been corrupt. But that's just really a very lazy thing to say. Because Asia has not been corrupt all along. It became corrupt because of many systems that were placed. It became corrupt because of this massive class divide. It became corrupt because of systemic issues, these complex systems that just don't work in favor of the public. And why do they don't work in favor of the public? Well, let's start with historical and colonial legacies. Long histories of oligarchies, tribal chieftainships, and all these kinds of class divides. Colonial systems of tribute maintained this massive class divide. In these systems, power and wealth remained concentrated in the hands of a few, leading to favoritism. Then came economic disparities, weak system of law, political patronage, and the works. Political scientist Francis Fukuyama argued that corruption breeds or erupts when personal relationships become stronger than public institutions. Family, party, clan, connection. This becomes more important than formal rules. Jobs go to insiders, contracts go to insiders, opportunities flow not through merit but through connection. Now, Europe had these systems, Latin America has these systems, Middle East has these systems, Africa has these systems. The question isn't why corruption exists. The question is, when do institutions become strong enough to overcome them? Now let's go country by country. Bangladesh. What happened in 2024? There was a massive protest against the governmental job quota system. Many believe that the civil service opportunities were being influenced by the privileged political leaders than the merit of the people itself. So this nationwide protest led to the government to finally listen to them when Sheikh Hasina stepped down from power after 15 years. The quotas weren't the issue. The main question was, if the young people study hard, work hard, will the system reward them? Sri Lanka may be one of the examples where frustration really reached a breaking point. Years of poor economic management combined with debt, inflation, and the collapse of tourism created a national crisis. People faced fuel shortages, food shortages, medicinal supply shortages, blackouts, runaway inflation. The protest movement was called the Araglaya, the struggle, where citizens occupied public spaces, protesters entered governmental buildings. Eventually, they entered the presidential palace itself. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa resigned and fled the country. Economic crisis became a political crisis. People really stopped believing that the political elite could solve a problem that they themselves created. Thailand's youth movement wasn't primarily about economics. It was about finding a voice, needing a voice. It was in 2020 that the students demanded democratic accountability. Beginning in 2020, students demanded constitutional reform, democratic accountability, an end to military participation or visibility or domination of politics, greater freedom of expression. Some people questioned institutions openly that the previous generations rarely ever did. This saw a generational shift where young Thais were not accepting what was just been given to them and rather getting out and demanding for their needs and rights. Nepal is one of Asia's most overlooked stories. Many young people leave Nepal every year in search for jobs abroad. And remittance supports a significant part of the economy. Leaving the country for looking for opportunities outside is looked at as the norm. Many young people believe that literally opportunities exist somewhere else. Corruption, political instability, youth unemployment, housing rise, poor governance, lack of opportunity. The question many young Nepalis ask is heartbreaking. Why does success require leaving Nepal? Indonesia is often looked at as Asia's most democratic success stories, but many young Indonesians don't feel that way as the frustration has started to grow. Students have repeatedly protested against corruption, democratic backsliding, anti-institutional framework, controversial legislation, weakening anti-corruption institutions. Large demonstrations erupted in 2019 and again in 2024. Many protesters worried that the democratic reforms achieved after the fall of Suharto were slowly being weakened. Their message wasn't anti-democratic, the message was pro-democracy. India perhaps presents one of the biggest paradox of Asia. It has a thriving economy. The country is growing rapidly. There is a booming tech sector. The startup ecosystem is widely recognized. There are global ambitions of every Indian right now. And the most important part is that it has the world's youngest population. So why is there so much anxiety in India? Because India is facing what economists call educated unemployment. Having studied for so many years, putting in all the work, putting in all the money, putting in everything that the young people and the parents of these young people in making sure that they get the right education, they work hard, they study hard for years and years and years, and when they've gone to give that exam, the papers are leaked, the system is rigged. The educational board has no accountability, because when students look at governmental recruitment exams as life-changing opportunities, what do? When these opportunities are rigged, what do? When these opportunities have exams, papers that are leaked. They have online portal systems, which are grading systems that are vulnerable to people tampering with it. This has also led to 2 students committing suicide. For many students, this wasn't just one examination. It was years of preparation. It was years of hard work. It was years of aspiration. It was years of hope. It was years of sacrifice. It was years of pressure. And one devastating question: can I trust the system to be fair? India's youth are not demanding revolution. They are demanding transparency, compliance, trust, opportunities, competence, merit, one chance. So what connects all of them? There are different countries, different economies, different governments, different religions, yet one emotion. Political scientists call this relative depravation. People don't become angry because they are poor. They become angry because they feel that they deserve more, they deserve better than they've been given. Today's Asians have the reason to think that. The most globally aware generation in history. They are the most they are the most educated generation in history. They are the most globally aware generation in history. They know what is possible. They can compare their lives to other people around the world instantly. And they're constantly asking why opportunities look like they're more accessible if you are wealthy, privileged, or in a position of power. Why is there still gatekeeping happening in every corner, in every systems of the country? So are we witnessing a nation spring? Maybe. Not one ideology, not one country, not one history, not one movement. This is something way more complicated. It's a continental mood, a generation refusing to accept the gap between promise and reality. Here's the important part. The young people protesting across Asia are not demanding for utopia. They're asking for institutions that work, merit, opportunities, governmental exams that are not leaked, transparency, the chance to build a good life without needing a right surname, without needing a right connection, without needing a right political patron. The story of Asia's next decade may not be about GDP growth. It may be about technology. It may be about geopolitics. It may be about whether governments can adapt to the expectations of the most educated generation that they have produced. Because from Dhaka to Delhi, from Colombo to Kathmandu, from Bangkok to Jakarta, millions of young people are asking the same question. That if countries are growing, why does our future feel so uncertain? And that question may be the defining political story of Asia. Or perhaps the real revolution isn't happening in the streets, it's happening in the minds of these young people, in the minds of this young generation that is starting to believe that perhaps progress isn't just economic growth. They just don't want prosperity, they want fairness, and they are not afraid to demand, ask, and protest for it. And something deeper is happening. Beneath the protests, there is a pattern. Generation changing its pattern because it no longer believes or trusts what happens in the future. Gen Z earn less than previous generations, but yet they spend more than previous generations. They're spending more while they're earning less and borrowing money for experiences, for experiential concerts, for traveling for music concerts, for going to spend more time with their friends across the country. They are not saving for a house because they know that the house is something that's going to be out of their reach. They are not saving for having a family because they know if they don't have much for themselves, how are they going to be able to create a family? They're not saving for children because in this political and economic and climate change, how are they going to raise a kid or themselves? Chinese researchers even coined the term the last generation. The underlying idea is that when all these milestones feel unachievable that have been set by the previous generations, people are creating their own new definition of success. China's Tangping or lying flat movement became internationally famous, where instead of climbing the corporate ladder, some choose part-time work. South Korea gave us another term, the Nepo generation. Originally, it meant giving up on dating, then marriage, then children, then home ownership, then friendships. Eventually, the list became so long that N simply meant giving an unlimited number of traditional life goals. Why? High housing costs, intense competition, long work hours, economic pressure. Young Koreans weren't rejecting family. Many simply felt that they couldn't afford one. Then came China's Let It Rot movement, where youth introduced another phrase called bailan, that means, translated loosely, to let it rot. It's an expression of exhaustion, not necessarily laziness, but resignation. People feel the competition is so intense that trying harder won't change the outcome. Lying flat movement became a cultural counter movement that described a generation's rejection of societal pressure to overwork, overachieve, and participating in the grueling rat race. It's a generation that's rewriting the rules of what success, adulthood, and citizenship is supposed to look and feel like.